All right, so moving on to the next segment, I'll be sharing my thoughts on who are the best strikers and the best grapplers currently in the UFC today. So I have 6 fighters total that I'll be discussing in this segment. 3 for the best strikers I do believe are currently the best strikers in the UFC. And then 3 of the best grapplers that I do believe are part of the UFC roster today. So we'll start off with strikers, then lead our way to the grapplers section. So one of the best strikers in the UFC today is Ilia Topuria. Now, Ilia Topuria, I do believe, is one of the best strikers that the UFC has to offer. He's an amazing striker, known for his boxing skills, that boxing background. I mean, he has the lethal hands that fly, and his hands, the effectiveness that he lands when he lands the power strikes, makes me think that Ilia Topuria would have no problem transitioning to the sport of boxing. I mean, he's got strong power, great footwork, and has great head movement. He's a phenomenal striker. Has 6 knockouts to his resume of his MMA career thus far, and is the only man in UFC history to knock out Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway, and did that within 3 rounds last year in the UFC, knocking out two all-time greats at the featherweight division. So when Ilia Topuria lets his hands fly, he has an effective jab, a stiff jab to keep his opponents off him. He can land the 1-2 combinations. When he lets the hands fly, he is very lethal and explosive. I do believe he's one of the best strikers that the UFC has to offer today. Now, next would be Alex Pereira. Now, Alex Pereira, I do believe, is one of the best strikers in the UFC today. He's a dangerous striker, he's been famous. He's got known for being famous, becoming a household name for having the explosive TNT dynamite hands, landing knockouts. And that's the reason why he's one of the most popular and one of the polarizing figures that the UFC has to offer today. And he's a former kickboxer. That's how Alex Pereira has grown into the UFC, being a former kickboxer, and used that kickboxing background to become a 2-division world champion in the UFC today. And the fact that Alex Pereira has a dangerous left hook, great head movement, great counter striker, and has put the likes of Sean Strickland, Israel Adesanya, Yuri Prochazka, Jamal Hill, and Khalil Roundtree to sleep, winning those fights by knockout with his lethal striking abilities, makes Alex Pereira one of the best strikers in the UFC today. And last but not least, I can't go without saying that Max Holloway is one of the best strikers that the UFC have to offer today. He has the record for the most significant strikes landed in UFC history, with a total of 3,706 significant strikes landed in his UFC career thus far. That is a lot of bombs, a lot of strikes for someone that has not even hit his late 30s yet. Has already put together a Hall of Fame career this far in his UFC career, that being Max Holloway. But Max Holloway is one of the greatest strikers in the UFC due to having great IQ, has great head movement, unmatched volume, can keep it up for the duration of the entire fight for 3 to 5 rounds and not get tired, not get winded, keep up the same momentum, and land the same amount of strikes that he did from round 1 all the way until the fight ends. And he has 12 victories come away of knockout. His hands helped him become one of the best strikers in UFC history, and has one of the greatest knockouts of all time, knocking out Justin Gaethje last year at UFC 300 at the buzzer beater, telling him to stand in the middle of the octagon. We're going to rumble for the final 10 seconds and knock them out with 1 second to spare. I think Max Holloway is one of the best strikers in UFC today. Now, those are the three best strikers. Now, let's move on to the grappling category. Now, Islam Makhachev is one of the best grapplers that the UFC has to offer. I mean, he's learned well from his cousin Khabib, that Khabib being one of the greatest combat fighters in combat sports history, having a dominant wrestling background. And Islam Makhachev is one of the best grapplers in the UFC due to setting great traps to make his opponents make mistakes and then capitalize on it and trap them to make mistakes. He's great at landing takedowns, great at submission skills, able to control the fight on the ground, has a total of 13 submission victories in his MMA career, and his grappling really helped him become arguably, however you guys have your pound-for-pound list, a top 3, top 2, top 1 fighter in the UFC today based off his grappling skills alone. I think Islam Makhachev is one of the greatest grapplers in UFC history. Now, next is Charles Oliveira. I think Charles Oliveira is one of the greatest grapplers that the UFC has ever seen, and definitely one of the best grapplers in the UFC today. Holds the record for the most finishes in UFC history, thanks to having 16 submission victories in his UFC career, a total of 21 submission victories total in his MMA career. And what Charles Oliveira does as a great grappler, he sets up traps well to trick his opponents and bait him into making mistakes. He has great IQ, great at landing takedowns, has the ability to control the fight well on the ground. And the way how Charles Oliveira has won several fights by submission against some top tier names at the lightweight division, some of the greatest lightweight fighters that we've ever seen in the UFC, that being Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje, even though they're not known grapplers, that's still impressive for putting those type of fighters to sleep in your UFC career. And also one of the reasons why Charles Oliveira has become a former lightweight champion in the UFC is due to his amazing jiu-jitsu background. The great grappling and wrestling that he possesses has helped him become one of the best fighters in the UFC today and one of the best lightweight fighters of all time. So Charles Oliveira deserves to be on this list as well. And last but not least, I have to put, this one was debatable, but I'm putting Khamzat Chimaev here. Khamzat Chimaev is one badass, man. I mean, he's got so many ways to beat you, and he's so young, and his UFC career is so early into it. And he just got a million ways to beat you, already a dangerous striker, and you got to respect his power in the striking category. Then that opens the door for what he could do to you grappling. And landing takedowns is what Khamzat Chimaev does well, yes. Landing the takedowns, being control on the mount, on top, on side control, controlling the pace on the ground, and the way how he just dominated Robert Whittaker at the end of 2024 when they fought, and he put him away, made him submit in one round. I mean, the whole entire fight was basically on the ground. How he just made Robert Whittaker look silly. And then applied that bulldog choke, or that, I'm not going to call it a bulldog choke, but the choke basically shut Robert Whittaker's jaw shut, and his jaw actually broke from how tight the submission hold that he had on Robert Whittaker was, and Robert Whittaker was forced to submit 2 to 3 seconds into the chokehold. I think Khamzat Chimaev has already proved that he's one of the best wrestlers and best grapplers that the UFC has to offer. But those are my top 3 and top 3 strikers and top 3 grapplers that the UFC has to offer today.